All right. Hi everyone, it's Katie from the Clark Museum, and today we're going to be checking out Timber Heritage Association out in Samoa. This is really exciting. I really like coming out and visiting with these guys. And we got some pretty exciting behind the scenes things to show you. So as of course you might know, this is part of the Humboldt History Symposium 2020, which is all digital this year. If you enjoy this program or any of the other programs that we offer throughout the week, please consider checking out our website, clarkmuseum.org/HHS. You can see the full schedule for the week. You can also see ways you can help support this event and future programs by donating, participating in our drive-through dinner, or by sharing this video and other videos with others. So I'm going to turn it over to some of our Timber Heritage folks right now, and we'll go ahead and get this started.
Hi, I'm Bruce Sievertson, Community Liaison Outreach for Timber Heritage Association, and we're going to watch them bring out a 44-ton diesel-electric locomotive. It was built in 1953 for the work on the Pine Flat Reservoir down by Fresno, and has had a long history here, both in Arcata, and then it went to Louisiana with the LP, Louisiana Pacific Lumber Yards, and then was donated back to Timber Heritage, and since it's come back here, we've done restoration work on it, painted it, and a lot of other things. So let's just watch it roll out here. And it requires two people. Somebody has to drive it, and somebody has to motion to bring it out. No one's allowed to be in front of it at the time. This, because it's only 44 tons, was operated by just one person. This was rather unique. Even though it's diesel electric, they would have had a fireman if it was 45 tons. So they got around these things in different ways. This particular one, after it was manufactured and certified as a 44-tonner, then they welded steel plates onto it to make it heavier, because they needed it to be heavier to do the work that it was designed to do initially. And we're going to roll stairs over by it, and your host is going to go up inside of it, and they can roll it back a little bit with her inside of it. Maybe they'll let her take the throttle and not the brake. So come on,
all right.
let's wander over here.
Yeah, very cool. All right.
This is Fridley.
Yeah, I know Katie.
Hi.
Like everybody else out here, we used to do something else.
Yeah.
Richard was protecting our highways, and I was teaching kids how to do bad things in geography.
Very cool. All right.
So the seat swivels around here.
Okay. Woo. Okay.
If you're going that way, you want to turn the seat up there.
Okay.
It's what they call a switch engine. It's made to go either direction.
Okay. Cool. All right.
Brakes,
Okay. Brakes.
the throttle,
Throttle.
forward and reverse.
Okay.
Pretty simple, really.
Yeah. All right. So are we moving? Okay. Yep. All right. I'm good. Here we go. We're moving.
We're going to blow the whistle.
All right.
Good time, but we're going forward.
Woo! There we go. All right. Oh, we're pretty high up here.
Shut it down here.
All right. Okay.
They both run all the time. It's been re-engined. These are newer motors than what came in.
All right. There we are. Very cool. Wow. That's something else.
This is something else. You know, we don't normally run this locomotive out at all. When it first came here, it was in very, very dirty, poor shape. We have finished off all the painting. We had to jack it up at one point and change one of the wheel sets underneath of it. And the other end of it, because it's identical, front and back, has an F on it.
Oh, okay.
You know which is the and you heard it go beep, whoop, toot. That's train talk.
Okay.
That's we're going forward. Toot, toot, toot. We're going backwards.
Okay.
So something that we always are working on, trying to keep it up. And if we just step in here for just a second.
Yeah.
This wall is something else we've been working on since we've been shut down with COVID. The interior wall here was failing,
Okay.
and the whole building was in disrepairs, and there was a possibility that it could collapse on us,
Okay.
like many of the other buildings out here have. And so volunteers came out and cleared this whole thing up. You can see over here how, where it isn't painted, how the wall had started to come down right up here.
Mm-hmm.
And we took a forklift and we raised it back up again and built this wall underneath of it and then put plywood on the other side. This used to be this high.
Oh, wow.
And you can see what we all did with it. We're else we hit our head one way or another.
Yeah.
So we decided to cut this and make this opening larger as well. There weren't
Okay.
doors on this building when we first came out here. So we built these doors. And CAL FIRE has been out helping us paint both interior and exterior buildings. They also clear rails for us as part of the weed abatement to keep fires down.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to wander over this way to the Roundhouse. This is the oldest wooden roundhouse in the western United States. It was built in 1893. There used to be tens of thousands of these roundhouses, and there's only a handful left now. Any community that had anything to do with locomotive would have had a roundhouse. And it's kind of confusing because roundhouses didn't necessarily have a turntable.
Mm-hmm.
When you think of turning locomotives around, you think of a roundhouse and turning them around on a turntable.
Oh.
This never had one. So the locomotives would come in at night, just as you'll see them as we come around the corner here, and they would go into the stalls where they would sit overnight, have maintenance done on them, and then in the morning they would back out. So there was a series of rails going into every one of these stalls. And we brought out a couple of other things here that really haven't been exposed to the public at all either. The first one, Carl, would you like to say a couple things about the Black Widow here? The paint job on it?
Well, the paint job is reminiscent of Southern Pacific Railway diesel locomotives back in the 1950s. And the speeder itself, we don't really know how old it is, but I suspect it's between the 1940s and maybe early 50s. The engine in it is definitely from 1950 or thereabouts.
Okay.
And it came from, we believe, the Oregon and Northeastern Railroad.
Cool.
And would you like to hear it run or not?
Oh. let's check it out.
I suppose so.
Hopefully. Let's see if it'll start.
This thing is all engine.
That's all engine.
Let's see.
Oh, there we go. Woo! All right. Very cool.
And this is a maintenance away vehicle. This is what they would have gone up and down the tracks on, checking for problems as they would clear tracks or move equipment around. And because we operate maintenance away vehicles out here, we're allowed to do the same kind of thing on the rails. We can take them back and forth, up and down the rails. Yeah, it took loggers to the woods.
Okay.
It could be used as an ambulance if somebody was injured. They were occasionally used as school buses to take children to school. They were just a very handy device. And they were called speeders because you could start them up speedy.
Okay.
With a locomotive, you had to build a fire and wait for the steam to build up on all these other locomotives in here.
Okay. Very
And
cool.
this item over here, definitely nobody has seen. And some people probably wish they'd never seen it because Bernie has been working on it for a long time. This is Bernie Christen, and he's in charge of this trolley project, and he'll talk to you about it.
All right.
Okay, this trolley is a surplus from a Netflix series called Lemony Snicket, and a series of unfortunate events, I think. And the Netflix people purchased this. It didn't look like this. They built it this way. They used it a little bit in their series and then sold it. And the people that we purchased it from had they were the ones that Netflix had sold it back to.
Okay.
And it also came with the diagram of how to power this thing. When we got it, it had no brakes, it had no engine, had no motor, nothing to make it work.
Okay.
So we have installed a small engine in it
Okay.
down under the floor, and converted it to, I'm going to call it net drive,
which is a hydraulic drive similar to an automatic transmission.
Okay.
And it's able to run about 10 miles an hour, 10, maybe 12,
Okay.
and go either direction. The panel that's on one end, this would be the front, this is our net drive right here, and the engine throttle on the other side. On the other end of the trolley is the same thing.
Okay.
So the operator can operate it from here, throw a couple switches, and operate it from the other end.
Cool.
It has brakes that operate from both ends. So again, it goes about 10 to 12 miles an hour. It'll haul about 10 people, but this is what they put together for the Netflix movies.
Very cool.
And it's unfortunate that it didn't get used a lot more, but it didn't because various reasons, I guess.
Yeah. And so you guys have, it sounds like you guys have some pretty big plans for this, right?
Yeah, this will, from what I understand, it's going to be used primarily in Old Town,
Okay.
just to haul people just back and forth.
Okay.
And it's not made to go a long ways, probably 4, 5, 6 blocks.
Okay.
And that's it. It's not meant to go 20 miles or 10 miles or 5 miles or even a mile.
Yeah.
It's just short trip
Okay.
thing. So
Wow. What a cool addition.
yeah, it's gonna go ahead.
Oh, okay. Ding ding. All right. Very cool. Well, thanks for sharing with us.
You're welcome.
Everyone's watching me. Where are we going next?
Back at the Roundhouse.
Ah.
James wanted to talk about the exterior of the Roundhouse just a little bit, and then we're going to go inside and look at a couple things inside.
All right.
Okay, well, like any living, functioning shop, everything got changed. So if anyone ever talks about authentic, you have to pick a cutoff date. This Roundhouse was modified as equipment changed. Originally, all of the locomotives were relatively small. They were sent up here into the harbor on ships, and so they didn't need doors very high. And then they got a big one. And if you look up the top there, you can see a gable that had to be installed to clear for the stack of the biggest locomotives they had. And so things get modified. Now, Timber Heritage has modified it again, and but you can see we have the one tallest door in there, and one of our biggest locomotives is sitting in there as well. There's another quirky feature around on the side, because this yard would have been crisscrossed with rails, and there was a rail that went down the side of the Roundhouse. And if you look at the eaves on the side, there's a funny part where it's cut off, because the locomotive got too close to it, and they had to trim the eave off for the vehicle to get by to get in along the rail that goes into the boiler shop.
Oh my
and
gosh.
the machine shop over there. The little funny bits of history that we risk losing if we don't preserve them.
Yeah.
This building would in fact be on the ground if volunteers hadn't spent a lot of time re-roofing it. All of the complex out here has been re-roofed in the last 10 years. Otherwise, water damage, and we would have seen a lot of walls coming down. That's what I wanted to talk about.
All right.
And we can go inside for just a second, and
Okay.
Sean wants to talk a little bit about the different kinds of locomotives. A rod locomotive versus a Shea locomotive, the number 7 versus the number 15. And when we look at the number 15, many of you will recognize the number 15 because it was in Sequoia Park. and children used to play on it and fall off, and like children do, they break their wrists and those kinds of things. And so eventually it was donated to us. So let's go inside the Roundhouse here for a minute. And this is Sean Mitchell. He teaches at Eureka High. I knew there was a high school around here.
Okay, so I always like to tell people that there is the right side of a shay and the wrong side of a shay. So this is the right side. The front of the locomotive is that way, and this is sort of the business side of a shay locomotive. You can see that it's an 8-wheel drive locomotive. So you actually have the 4 wheels here, and you have the 4 wheels in the front, so we call these trucks. So this would be 1 truck here and 1 truck up there, so this is a 2-truck shay. This is a 1918 Lima product, so it's from Lima, Ohio. The shay locomotive was really, really indicative of the almost temporary, like, logging railroads we had in this area. So if you walk along the side here, I'll show you. These are the drive shafts right here, and this engine is a 3-cylinder. So we have 1 cylinder here, 1 cylinder here, and 1 here. Have you ever seen the movie Titanic, and they have that engine room scene where you see the things going up and down? Same exact thing. It's actually of the same vintage almost. I mean, this is patented in 1908.
Wow.
So this technology really made the locomotive really torquey, so it was a really, really heavy puller, not very fast. This thing's screaming going down the rails might do 16, 17 miles an hour. So it's this particular engine is 55 tons. It actually pulled log trains out of Corbell up to the Mad River Canyon for the Northern Redwood Lumber Company and later the Arcata and Mad River Railroad. They purchased it secondhand from a company in Washington. And the funny thing is this was the number 1 when it was in Washington. They changed it to the number 7.
Oh.
And if we look at this number plate up here, you can actually see, this is something I love showing people. If you look at the number plate, you can actually see where they added the 7.
Oh, look at that.
So this is one of my favorite locomotives. It's a really manageable size, and personally I would love to see this thing actually rebuilt one day. The fun thing about a shay is if you're standing at the center line of the engine, you can see the boiler is actually off to the right side, or to our right, the left side of the locomotive.
Okay.
So this engine ran for Arcata and Mad River until the late 50s. They basically put it into storage, and then the Simpson Lumber Company ended up doing an excursion train. And the excursion train ran from about 67 until 71.
Okay.
This is the locomotive that helped start the Annie and Mary days.
Oh, wow.
So the Annie and Mary days ran between, they had an excursion between Arcata and Blue Lake, and it ran on the Arcata and Mad River, which is the oldest railroad in California.
Wow.
1854, it goes all the way back to that time period. So, Bruce mentioned the difference between a shay locomotive with these upright cylinders. I want to talk really quick about a rod locomotive. If you look at the number 15, you can see this wheel set here. So, this is a 2-truck shay. This is what we call a 282. So, a 282 means that we have 2 wheels in the front that pilot the locomotive. They basically help it steer and guide the boiler down the tracks. We have 8 wheels that actually drive. These are called the drivers. So we have 2, 4, 6, 8. And then back here we have the trailing truck. This supports this big old firebox. So this locomotive has side rods. As you can see, the cylinders are in the front, and it actually has these side rods that go up and down like this. This is called a Walthert's valve gear, and then the number 29, which I'm going to show you next, is just a little bit different.
Okay.
This engine is kind of like Humboldt County's engine. Everybody loves this thing. I've had people come in here and go, "Oh, what happened to that engine that was at Sequoia Park? I fell off of it and broke my arm when I was a kid." And I'm like,
Here it is. Here, I'm actually going to step back a bit so we can get kind of, so people can see how tall it is, because
so
this thing is huge.
yeah, this locomotive is 90 tons. It used to actually haul log trains from this particular facility. It lived in the stall, and it used to go all the way up to Fresnel. So it would run right down there on the beach near Clayton Beach, and then go over this big trestle into Fresnel, and it would haul log trains.
Wow.
So if you've been on the Hammond Trail, This is the Hammond Roller.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Ah, that's so cool.
Yeah, really cool. It sat outside for so long, we would love to restore it cosmetically. As far as completely restoring it, I think we need to contact Bill Gates maybe, get it up and going. I would love to show you the number 29 really quick. So, 1986 or so, what would become Timber Heritage acquired this locomotive from the Pacific Lumber Company, which was beginning to stop existing because of the Maxam takeover. This locomotive is a 1910 Baldwin product, so it came from Philadelphia. This particular engine used to be a wood burner. And if you think about it, I think, you want to go ahead and ring the bell for us?
I will ring the bell.
So, I think it's pretty interesting to think that in 1910, we didn't have a railroad to San Francisco. And that means that this locomotive was actually brought in by ship. They
Whoa.
brought it to Scotia, and they basically had to assemble it from a type of like almost ready to go like pit. This engine was a wood burner, which makes sense for Pacific Lumber Company. They later converted it to fuel oil, which is what most steam locomotives use on the West Coast. This particular engine is actually the engine in this facility that most recently steamed up.
Huh.
They actually steamed it up in the Eureka Southern Rail Yards in 1986.
Okay.
And ran it back and forth, and then she shut down, hasn't run since. We would love to see this engine running. A lot of people remember this engine down in Scotia. It was actually the last steam engine that ran for Pacific Lumber, and even when they switched to diesel, they were still using this thing basically as a backup. And as you can see, we cosmetically restored it. This is one of the big projects we did recently. So nice shiny black on the boiler skin, and then this is actually the smoke box right here. Really beautiful locomotive. I think we're gonna go ahead and move on down towards the machine shop.
All right.
I could do this for 4 hours.
Get out here in what we call Caboose Square.
All right.
We have normally our salmon, oyster, ales, and rails activity. And if you come over here, what James talked about, up here you can see on the corner of the roundhouse here how they cut that edge of the eave off
Oh yeah.
because the locomotives were getting bigger and bigger, and they had to, where you were standing, this would have all been rails, series of rails going back and forth. In fact, there were rails that connected the roundhouse to the boiler shop.
Whoop.
And this building, which again, we're in the middle of restoring a lot of these out here, constantly working on them, putting, as been mentioned, new roofs onto them. Hopefully coming from Scotia, we may have new windows for this because they're tearing down a building in Scotia right now. We haven't talked about it a lot, but we're always doing fundraising. In fact, our auction just closed last Saturday, and it was very, very successful for Timber Heritage. We appreciated everybody that donated either funds through the moment of giving or purchased items. Anyway, locomotives would have come into this building, had their boiler taken off, and been rebuilt in there. And it's interesting because they call this a boiler shop, and we're going to go to the machine shop, but the machine shop and the boiler shop, they didn't. It's just interesting how they name things.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say at this point. So let's scroll down here.
I think it's fun to mention also that we talk about historical accuracy. None of these buildings had doors, and they didn't have like necessarily windows that closed because they were constantly operational. There are people here 24/7.
So we can look in here for just a minute. Lots of times this building is closed up to the public because of projects that are going on in here. Here we have the head rig for a mill that was donated to us, and eventually we're going to restore this, build a mill structure where we can actually mill logs just for display purposes like they have at the High Desert Museum, for example, up in Oregon. You come a little bit further in, you can see the big double doors down there on the end, and those would have opened up and that's where they would have brought the locomotives in to be worked on. And then they have a crane up in the ceiling, which wasn't functioning when we came here, but we have volunteers, electricians that are volunteers, and they repaired that so it functions now. And they would have brought a locomotive in, taken the crane, lifted the boiler off of it, taken it away, and then they would have worked on it in here.
Wow.
All these floors would have been dirt to begin with rails. Many of them were just put in the 70s.
Okay.
So the structural members of these buildings sometimes went right down into the dirt. So let's go on to and you can see a lot of equipment here, very large lathes. We have numerous lathes. And we'll wander on to the machine shop. And Sean will talk a little bit about our Suburban
Oh my gosh.
high railer as we're walking by it.
So this is kind of my new project I've been working on. Pete Johnston, our president, he had a neighbor, was that Cutton area?
Yes.
This thing was covered in so many blackberry brambles that you almost couldn't see it.
Wow.
In fact, when I worked on the fuel pump a few months back, I actually found an extra fuel line on the schematic, and I was thinking, I don't recognize this. Well, it was a blackberry vine.
Oh my gosh.
Grown all the way inside of it.
Wow.
From the best I can figure out, we know that this thing came from Southern Pacific Railroad, which was the owner of the Northwestern Pacific Railroad. There's a chance this actually operated on our local railroad, but I've yet to find hard evidence of that. Either way, we know it came from Southern Pacific. So this is what we call a high rail vehicle. And a high rail vehicle, you actually set it on the tracks. It has a special mechanism where you can actually lock the steering wheel so it's straight. And what you do is you actually take this thing and you set it on the rails, like at a grade crossing or anywhere where you can access a road and the railroad. You lock the steering wheel, you actually set the thing up on the tracks, and this vehicle runs on the rails like a train.
All right.
So the plan is, because they actually do this on the Nevada Northern, they do this back east. The plan is to actually make this our next sort of like all-weather, all times a day. I think a sunset cruise would be so cool, and actually take people out and give them a ride in this high rail. The speeder's awesome, but I have been in the speeder during pounding rainstorms,
Yikes.
and people don't love it when they're getting rained on. So hopefully in the future, especially like during a wet winter, we can use this to continue to give people that rail opportunity. And it's just a super cool, I mean, it's sort of retro, 1984, it's still within Southern Pacific. So we hope to see this going up and down Samoa and Manila. It's all registered, running, happy now. So eventually we hope to see it in Eureka too.
All right.
In the Slough Bridge.
Oh,
And
cool.
it'll fit about 7 people, and they'll get a narrated, like, intimate tour of the railroad from actual historians who, you know, teach this stuff, like me and my buddy Josh, who's also a board member. So we love this project. It's
Oh,
really cool.
so cool.
So we go on into the machine shop here. As you can see, there's a lot of equipment in here also. We're continually working on it, using those funds that come to our all-volunteer Timber Heritage Association, and trying to restore and utilize the things that are donated to us. And Renee Ross is going to talk about some of the collections out here. She's our collection committee chairperson, and she has put together a beautiful collection over here, and then she has a couple other things she wants to talk about.
Sweet. Hi, Renee.
These are some widely published. Most of them are from Danny Hess, who was, as you can see, he was a lumberman and a sawmiller and a historian. He had this vast collection that he gave to THA. And we have a lot more of it on the shelves and boxes, but this is just a little sample. And it's, you know, it's a two-man saw, some jackboots, tongs, cables, chainsaws that you we could, you know, actually put together a you know, chainsaw collection, just, you know, all the way from the beginning of when chainsaws, you know, first became popular until, you know, some that are, that we, you know, we are still using today. Okay, and these are, some more,
Wow, yeah, look at those.
these are patterns. Most of they were used in a foundry. Most of them are made of wood. They would be used in sand casting. And it's a process that a mold is made either from metal or wood, or sometimes wax even. It creates a negative impression in a special kind of sand, a sand that has a kind of clay embodied in it. It gets hard. They pull out the model and pour in the molten metal. I have a really nice quote from Andy Genzoli. People will remember Andy Genzoli used to write for the Times Standard, and he was referring to cast items when he said that I never knew how a foundry worked or how they cast great cogs, he wrote. Wheels and machine parts. I always felt they just happened. It was like you walk into Target and you see all this stuff for sale, and you just assume that somehow it appears there magically. Well, it doesn't appear there magically. It all has to be designed and constructed and refined and then cast, and then we can. Let's go look at this big cog wheel down here that would have been cast. And this is again a wooden pattern that would
All wood.
that would have been cast into a wheel, a cog wheel.
Wow.
So you want to talk about what other things? Yeah, what happened here in the machine
Light
shop?
enough to pick
Yeah.
up.
I mean, it's pretty amazing. All of these pieces came from Pacific Lumber,
Okay.
and they would have taken their patterns to Eureka Foundry, where they were cast.
And here's some pictures from Acme Foundry, and then there was Eureka Foundry. And it's interesting, this pile right here of something, do you recognize those?
No.
They're window weights
Oh my gosh.
from double hung windows. And you know, every window had weights in it. And here's a pile of the green sand that James had mentioned before. And this was down by T near Halverson Park, this foundry was. And as you could expect, probably in a foundry, it eventually burned down.
Yeah.
So we have hundreds, as Renee was saying, and these patterns were all down at Scotia, and they didn't want them any longer. They weren't sure what they were going to do with them, and so they donated them to us. There's also a machine shop, a tin shop down there that have all the patterns for making the flashings and everything that was needed for the town of Scotia. And of course, Scotia was a company town. It's no longer a company town. You can buy houses there, but Samoa still is a company town. It's one of only 2 company towns in the United States that's left. Now we're going to go over here by this Cat 60. Bert Bertolini, who is going to be, there's Dave Silverbrand is doing a program about him on Channel 23 tonight, and Bert just turned 100 on Saturday. And he's been volunteering out here for really a long time. And this is one of the projects that he rebuilt. Wow. And Leonard up there on the Cat 60 is going to start it. And he's going to try and start it. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't start when you want it to.
Okay.
And that Cat 60 would have been hooked up to this log arch.
Wow.
Prior to them using these log arches, which would have consisted of a cable, just like this cable right here, would have went up over that roller up at the top, went down and picked up, just like you see right here, the front end of a log. And so when they were towing it along, it just touched in the back. Wow. And you can imagine how much more environmentally sensitive this was, instead of having skid log areas where they had oxen and those kinds of things. So these all went together. And this talks about the skidding and the Caterpillar and the Cat 60. And if he manages to do this, it's fascinating, really.
One of the things you got to do before you start it after it's set a while, you got oil cups on top of the valve cover. You have to put oil in those because it drains out after time. Then there's the magneto, it's got an impulse lever. You flip that lever and you turn it over until it goes past top of the extender and make sure it clicks. So you got your magneto's working. And then you have to prime it with gas.
And this doesn't get started very often. If you want to see behind the scenes, and Bert wasn't hesitated to. Bert wanted somebody to know how to maintain this and everything, and he talked to several people out here, and it's a lot of work. And he finally settled on Leonard Ronlund. He's been here all of his life. His dad was a logger. Whoop. And where that bar goes in, the holes are tapered so that you don't lock into it. It doesn't kick back on you. He has to get it up to the cylinder to the correct position. And there you saw it fire just a little bit. Yeah. A little smoke came out.
You want to cut over and look at the drag saws? You want to talk about the drag saws?
Sure, we can do that while he's getting it started.
Yeah.
All right.
Drag saws are just the best.
All right.
You'll know when it starts.
Okay. Oh, okay.
You borrowed a couple of drag. Remember you borrowed a couple of drag saws for the car?
Yeah. Whoa.
So am I going to talk about drag saws?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the drag saws were invented here in Eureka. And there's an interesting story about it. The Little Woodsman was invented here in Eureka, and they made 2 of these. And the loggers laughed at him because it's got this kind of a flimsy blade out here, and it wasn't made to cut down trees like chainsaws were. It was made to lock them into log lengths so they could be hauled away, easily handled. So they made 2 of them, and a logger took one out in the woods and tried it. And he came back and he told everybody it's the most fantastic thing that's ever been invented. There were no chainsaws at that time or anything like that. The next day there was a line outside of this company business all the way around the block wanting to buy them.
Oh my gosh.
And they only had 2. So at that point they started making more. Now this was a one-man drag saw. One logger would have picked this up, put it over his shoulder, and walked out into the woods.
Oh my goodness.
How much does it weigh?
Yeah.
Pardon?
How much does it weigh?
Oh, I don't know. A lot more than I do.
A lot.
I was gonna say one person picking that up.
This part was driven into the log to stabilize it. And here's another one. This one runs. We're not going to start this up. But you can see that the blades often were very long because the logs were huge.
Yeah.
You know, there was no doubt about it. Now this is a McCullough chainsaw. This came later. This is probably from the 40s after the drag saw. And this one has what they call the stinger on the end. 2 people would have operated this. One person would have stood out here and held on to the end of it. And if the chain came off, it could come out, cut your arm off, or anything else
Yeah.
that went along with it.
I'd hate to be that guy. Jeez. Yikes.
So we have bigger drag saws, and when Pickers came out here, the television show Pickers,
Oh.
they wanted to find a drag saw. And they said they asked and asked everybody, and nobody knew where there was a drag saw. And I think they finally found one in North Carolina or something like that. You ask around here, if you're not a picker,
Yeah.
ask people, they have these things. Everybody has one in their garage. That's why we have so many of them out here.
Oh, that's funny.
So some of these are two people drag saws, obviously, get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And you see all the same principle on all of them. Again, because this is flexible, as it was cutting back and forth, this could bind and kick back on you, and again, cut your arm off or something like that. I mean, there was just absolutely nothing really guiding it once you got it started into the tree.
Yikes.
So we haven't gotten the Cat 60 started yet, but if we go over to the 101, we can talk about the 101. Sean will talk to you about the 101. Watch your head.
Whoa.
We use this trailer to haul the falk from up at Fort Humboldt, and when we take it to other places like the logging conference down in Ukiah, or to well, we've taken it all over the place actually.
Yeah.
Then we use this, and again we're restoring it right now. Everything is in a constant state of restoration. So, Sean, you have a minute to talk about the number 3 here?
I do. Okay, so this is the Silver and Carson number 3 locomotive. Some people refer to it as the Stockton Terminal and Eastern number 3. So this engine actually came up here at the Humboldt County and operated on the Dolger and Carson Railroad. This is actually the locomotive we talk about a lot because at one point there was a train wreck and it actually flipped into the bay.
Oh, jeez.
So I think we have a picture of it. So this engine operated like all other logging and general freight locomotives in this area, and it actually operated out of the Dolger and Carson shop. And this locomotive at one point actually flipped into the bay. So it was at its engine house over here, roughly where the Samoa Bridge is now. Sunday night, the guys were working on it. Somebody accidentally left the Johnson bar, which is basically like a gear shifter, in reverse.
Oh no.
They hook it up to the shop steam the next day, which is a practice they would do. You hook it up to the stationary boiler at the shop, and then you're a little bit more ready the next, that morning to get up and going. They take hours to get up to steam. So the guys go up to the cookhouse to eat breakfast. They come up back and find that the locomotive is gone. It had a little bit of throttle open, and it actually broke free of the shop, rolled down the tracks along this pier that used to be out there. It's next to our current railroad. It hit a derail device and flipped into the bay.
Oh no.
So it was in the mud for about 6 months actually, and they ended up recovering it and putting it back into service. So it ran in this area until the early 1950s. And then it went to a railroad called the Stockton Terminal and Eastern down in Stockton. There we go, that's the picture I was looking for.
Ah, here we go.
Thank you. Yeah. So the current railroad, we actually crossed in those feeders, is about here. And there's actually some there's some riprap right there that actually protects it. So it hit a derail device and flipped. And there's actually still some damage on the boiler that they riveted and fixed. So this engine went down to Stockton and it actually ran in excursion service and some freight service until 1955.
Okay.
It ends up getting put in the Stockton Terminal and Eastern Engine House, and it sits for 37 years.
Dang.
At that point, in about 1987, it was donated to the Sacramento State Railroad Museum, CSRM. They ended up donating it to us in 2007, 2008, because they knew it ran out of Samoa. They actually disassembled the engine completely.
Wow.
There's numbers up here. You can see them. Little numbers on the boiler. And there's a kind of like sort of smooth marks. They did what we call a UT, which is an ultrasonic test. Boilers are only safe if they're thick enough to operate. Anything that's too thin can cause a catastrophic failure. So Sacramento, they took the entire thing apart and they did a full UT. So they cut all the tubes out of it. They inspected every inch of the boiler and they said it's definitely a good candidate, but they already had a 262. 262. The wheels we were talking about earlier.
There we go.
So they abandoned the project. They donated the engine to us in 2008, and from that entire time, from 08 until 2020, there were 2 boxcars down in Sacramento full of parts.
Oh my gosh.
We went down there this February before everything kind of fell
Yeah.
apart, and we got all these parts back. So we're talking running boards, air tanks. This air compressor weighs as much as like a Volkswagen Beetle.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
huge. The cab we already have, but we got it mounted. We found all these different accessories. This is the oil pipe. We have the side rods now. So although the paint looks pretty bad, that's actually protective paint they put on it to prevent corrosion. Although it's rust colored, that doesn't concern us. A lot of it's just cosmetic. Actually, this thing would probably be the easiest for us to rebuild just because so much of it's already taken apart. One thing that I think is interesting to think about also, this engine, like the Roundhouse, at one point was actually modified in its life.
Okay.
In the beginning, steam locomotives would have what I call the Johnson bar, like your forward and reverse lever. This engine actually now has a power reverser. So when we're looking at images, trying to figure out how this thing goes back together, there's millions of parts in a steam locomotive. Not literally, but so we had to figure out, okay, well, where did all this stuff go? Because this was modified. This is actually a power reverse lever. I thought this was just something like for convenience. Turns out it was a mandate. Right before World War II, the federal government actually stepped in and said, hey look, Johnson bars are not safe. If there's ever some sort of bent rod or anything, what will happen is the Johnson bar can actually walk back and forth and it can actually hurt the engineer.
Oh geez.
They outlawed them.
Whoa.
So this engine, they actually added a power reverser. This lever, which is funny little rod right here, this is totally custom. They built this in Stockton. So this engine has a power reverser on it. Basically, you apply the lever and then the steam cylinder kicks in and it actually pushes the valve gear forward, and that allows you to adjust forward, reverse, and fine like valve timing movements. So if you follow it, this one just goes from here, goes down to this guy, and it actually slides this eccentric up and down. When it does that, it changes the valve timing over here.
Okay.
Pretty amazing technology that they added to an older locomotive. So, and we continue to try to figure out where these parts go. Like I said, there were so many pieces of it. And every little piece has been apart for, it's been apart for over 30 years.
Yeah.
So, trying to get it together.
Wow.
Next, Bruce.
Okay, if you want to come over here for just a second.
All right.
Going to talk about another change in technology, something that we're very, very proud of having. And that's this funny little tugboat right here.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah. Early on, when they moved logs around the ponds, they had what they called coalmen, or as they called themselves, pond monkeys. People that would jump from one log to another and push them here and push them there. Well, people fell into the ponds, and they always had a warming house for them, because in the winter, some of these ponds would be all but freezing cold water.
Yeah.
And so if you fell in, then you immediately were taken to a warming house. They eventually replaced it with this kind of tugboat-looking creature that has barbs on the front up here to push on the logs. And it had reinforcing here. This one was built in Oregon. And it had an outboard motor in the middle that could spin all the way around. It would go around and around and around. So you could literally turn this on a dime. You could
Wow.
just turn it around and around and around. And we had an older one, and then they found this one here in Humboldt County. And a couple of the volunteers went out and got it. So somebody would have stood up here on this decking and driven it around the pond and pushed the logs. So it would eventually go up the ramp to the mill where they would be sawed into pieces still. So this is one of the buildings, the machine shop here that we've been working on the interior. You can see.
Whoa, whoa.
Well, you can hear the Cat 60 when it's running.
That's for sure. Goodness.
Here's some information about the Cat 60. It was built in 1928. Just a couple years after Bert was born, actually. He's born in 1920, and here he is 2020, and he's 100 years old. And are you going to try again there, Leonard?
No. Oh no.
You have to get, if you come right up here, you can see what he's doing here. There's a mark on the flywheel, and he has to get just exactly on that mark and pull. And it didn't catch then, and here's another mark coming up right here. You can see, and he'll manipulate that up to the top. Here's the magneto. Instead of having a generator or an alternator like cars have now, it actually generated its own spark with the magneto. And you get that spot right to the top and then pull on it. Whew. And hope it catches.
Yeah.
And I've seen Leonard do this for what, 15, 20 minutes sometimes, Leonard?
Last time I started, it started on the third pull.
Oh.
I got it started on the first pull.
Some days better than others. Oh man.
And while we're watching him, we can talk about the cookhouse, which is right up here on the hill. And the cookhouse used to supply all the workers out here with their food. And as you know, it's a family-style restaurant still. And the workers would come down to work, stop at the cookhouse, have breakfast, walk downstairs between the cookhouse and here the shops and all that. And then they would walk back up for lunch and then come back down and work and go home, either on a ferry over to Eureka, or they would go to their home there in Samoa and then start the same procedure the next day. And I think they worked 6.5 days or something like that. I'm not positive. That somebody else knows more about that than I do.
Came across the day on the ferry, too.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
The Madicket.
The Madicket.
right.
And Leonard
Wow.
can tell you a little bit more about this because Bert not only rebuilt it, well, with Bob Felter. Bob Felter was involved in this as well very early on. But go ahead, Leonard, and tell them.
We got this thing out from, I think, Bridgeville. And brought it into town, and Bert Bertolini tore the whole thing apart, clear down to the frame. Engine, everything, transmission, he rebuilt it. This thing was built in 1928 in San Leandro.
Okay.
Ham Lumber Company, I think they bought 3 or 4 of them, and they used them in Corbell, Crenell, and Klamath.
Okay.
And it's, some of them had blades on them, but the ones they used in the woods just had the winch on the back to pull that original log arch back there. And the version that they used in the farm, in the valley, the orchards and stuff, had a canopy on it. And the fuel tank was on this side. So when they was running the tractor, they could see the road, so they could, get onto the whatever.
Oh.
Yeah, sometimes it starts fine, and sometimes
So it does take a little bit. Wow.
today was one of those days.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. That was really cool.
You're welcome. I'm taking pictures of our facility.
Yeah.
So this pretty much ends the tour. The time is running out here. Maybe you'd like to have a last word with any of the members that came out to participate today?
Sure.
Renee and Sean and
Let me scoot over
James
here
and
so
some
the
of your
lighting's a
thoughts?
little better. But yeah, anyone else want to say any last things?
I could just say that, I really love this organization because I first got into it seeing the speeders and seeing the steamboats at Fort Humboldt. And I think maybe a year later, I was already up on the cab of the locomotive getting to help operate. So we constantly are hoping to find more volunteers. We welcome people to come out, contact us on the Facebook page. We believe so strongly in this whole mission of having a real museum out here, an excursion train, and I think it's going to be just one of the coolest things for Humboldt County if we can make it happen. So, and thank you to the Clark.
Yeah.
for doing this. Awesome.
Got involved when, as far as the cataloging goes, because we had all of this stuff, but we didn't exactly know what we had, and there were no numbers assigned to them, to the different objects, and there was no report on the conditions or so. So that's what I've been involved in, and I think up until now we have about 600 items that I've cataloged.
Yeah.
And there are many more. Yeah,
All right.
thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything? No? All right. And actually, while I have you guys here still, if there is someone who's, after seeing this tour, is very jazzed to come and help out, how do they go about doing that?
Definitely consider emailing any of the board members on the timberheritage.org website. I personally monitor the Facebook page, so we're at facebook.com/timberheritage, and I'm sure we can link it also.
Yeah.
But basically, especially during the time of COVID, we've been doing a lot of the core group of volunteers have been coming out and helping, but especially as we start to open up some more, we need help track clearing, we need help, doing stuff around the shops. And if you have skills and an interest, definitely, message us on the Facebook or email us. So.
Oh, all right. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up for today. Thank you everyone who tuned in. If you have any leftover questions or whatnot, put them in the comments and I can get them over to the THA people to answer. And definitely be sure to check out their Facebook and all their social media. And with that, we'll wrap it up. We hope to see you at some of the future Humboldt History Symposium events. Sorry, too many acronyms. And if you want to see what other events are going on, be sure to check out the Clark website at clarkmuseum.org/HHS or our Facebook page. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you around.